in world politics and U.S. foreign policy and how it's going to affect those of us here in the United States. We would have to have one of the large auditoriums to hold this forum, but it's a little ahead of the curve. So thank you for coming to the panel, and it is being videotaped today by Sue Harris of the People's Video Network, which means that we have the potential to show it to some 8 billion people if we promote it well enough. My name is Phil Willeto. I'm a member of the Administrative Committee of the United National Anti-War Coalition, UNAC, and I coordinate an effort that is just beginning and far from solidified or formalized, but called the Odessa Solidarity Campaign. And what we're going to try to do today is have some brief presentations on the overall situation in Ukraine and why it is important. We're going to have a specific report on the situation in Donetsk, particularly one of the two provinces where there is fighting going on now between the nationalist forces and those who are resisting what we believe is an attempt to impose beyond a simple right-wing government, an actual fascist state in Ukraine. And then we have a special guest, Irina Koval, who is joining us from Odessa, Ukraine. And she'll be giving us a first-hand report of what is happening in that city. I'm going to give just a little brief overview of UNAC's role on this issue and how we got involved. Irina attended a national conference that UNAC sponsored in May of 2014. No. 2015, last May. This is Joe Lombardo, co-coordinator of UNAC, and he will be correcting me in the course of the panel. Irina came. There was and brought information about a terrible massacre, and that's the only word for it, that had taken place 1 year before, on May 2nd, 2014, which happened just a few months after the right-wing coup that replaced a president of Ukraine who was felt that the country should lean economically more towards Russia than Europe, and was replaced by a president who felt just the opposite. And the U.S. was up to its eyeballs in that coup. And there was a reaction across the country. One of the first things the new government did was ban the use of Russia as an official language in the country. And there was reaction throughout that led to the fighting in Donetsk and Lugansk. I'm still learning how to say hello and goodbye in Russian, so the city names are my next step. And the Odessa was a city that had particular significance for its historical role in opposing fascism. It was one of the 4 cities that were named heroic cities by the Soviet Union after World War II because of the resistance, the fierce anti-Nazi resistance that took place in that city after the Nazi occupation. Stories that make you wonder how people can rise to such heights of courage and such depths of depravity concentrated in one city. Irina will tell you about what happened on May 2nd, 2014, but at least 46 progressives were murdered by a fascist-led mob under horrible circumstances. And the relatives and families of the people who were killed there formed together as the Mothers' Council for May 2nd, have been demanding an international investigation because 2 years after this terrible massacre, which was filmed by numerous scores of people with cell phones, and you can see the mob throwing Molotov cocktails and shooting guns, and you can see their faces and identify them. They've been identified. None of them, not one, has been brought to trial.
and punished for the role that they played. Although there have been scores of people on the other side who have been arrested, and some of those are still in prison awaiting trial. UNAC got involved because we attended in March of this year a conference called the Social Forum of Eastern Europe and Cooperation between East and South. And it was representatives from left organizations from some 24 countries across Eastern and Southern Europe and North Africa, and some representation from China, from France, from Russia, and the United States. That was the UNAC delegation. And we met with representatives on the Mothers Council, and we asked them what we could do to help. We knew that there was a second anniversary memorial coming up. We knew the memorial was being threatened by the same fascist organizations that took part in the massacre, that organized the massacre. And we thought, well, they would say, you know, well, you could issue a statement, pass a resolution, sign a petition, publicize the situation. And so they said, we could come to Odessa on May 2nd and stand with us at the memorial. So we were kind of stuck, you know, it was like, we couldn't really say, no, we just do resolutions and attend conferences. So we wound up in Odessa. Bruce Gagnon, who's here with us today, at the end, and Regis Tremblay and myself. And in order to make more of an impact, we organized a solidarity campaign that was a statement calling on the governments of the United States, Ukraine, and Odessa, the city of Odessa, to ensure the safety of the people attending the memorial, and to support the demand for the Mothers Council for an international investigation. And within about a month, we had collected more than 150 endorsers, organizations from 22 countries. And I would say that about half of those came from UNAC contacts, and about half from Bruce's network, I got it down, the Global Alliance Against Weapons and Nuclear Power in Space. Global Network, right, almost. Which was just, is a tremendous network that Bruce has built that really responded. So then we actually brought the statement with the endorsers to the Ukrainian embassy in Washington, D.C., and that was delivered by Anna Edwards from UNAC, who had attended the Social Forum Conference, and Ray McGovern, who many of you probably know, a former CIA analyst and now prominent anti-war activist. And the two of them brought the statement and endorsers to a very surprised staff member at the Ukrainian mission, and then held a press conference. And one of the organized media groups at the press conference was from TASS news agency. And the next day, that reporter attended a daily press briefing at the State Department and asked Deputy Spokesperson Mark Toner about the massacre, the call for the investigation, the second anniversary memorial, and the threats against it. And Toner, videotaped, and it's not out on YouTube, said that, of course, the United States condemned the massacre of 2 years ago, big crocodile tears, and supported the call for an investigation, and welcomed any commemoration of the massacre, and condemned threats against it. So what we were trying to do was to get the attention of the United States government that there would be Americans at Kolikovo Square on May 2nd, and that people around the world were aware of that. It was kind of like going to Mississippi in '63 when you're white, saying, okay, now if you kill us, you know, it'll make the news. And that was the idea. The strategy was to get their attention. You know, to be honest, it's very hard to tell cause and effect in politics, and we don't want to pat ourselves on the back and say we did something that maybe we didn't. We like to think it had some effect, but there was a lot of internal politics in Ukraine going at the time. And the fact is that the police and National Guard who were there did take steps to discourage the fascists who showed up in force. And we hope that was because they were aware that it would be an international incident. Maybe it worked, maybe it didn't. The upshot was the day passed without serious trouble. So that was our contribution, and we're going to continue as the Odessa Solidarity Campaign. Black Sea, city with a long history of not only anti-fascist struggle, But a seaport city that prides itself on being internationalist and tolerant and diverse, and was the last place you would think that a horrible massacre of the type that took place 2 years ago happened. Irina was close friends with one of the people who died in the fire at the House of Trade Unions. It's a very personal situation for her, and she also was a strong supporter of the Mother's Council from May 2nd, and has made it her mission to spread the word of this massacre, and the Mother's Council demands for an international investigation, which UNAC is going to be promoting as hard as we possibly can. And I'd like to introduce Irina.
In Russian, and Anna will translate it. Осенью 2013 года и зимой 2014 в столице Украины, в городе Киеве, происходили массовые протестные движения «Майдан».
In the fall of 2013 and the winter of 2014, the mass protest movement called Maidan was taking place in Kiev, the capital of Ukraine.
В этом протесте принимали участие огромное количество людей, которые вышли бороться за светлое будущее.
An enormous amount of people came out to demonstrations to protest for so-called bright future.
Вся страна с напряжением следила за этими событиями.
The entire country was following the events with anxiety.
По своей специальности я являюсь пиар-специалистом и маркетологом, и я часто организовывала массовые мероприятия.
By my profession, I'm a PR specialist, marketer, and I've been organizing events.
На Майдане были мои друзья, которые часто звонили и писали мне и звали: присоединяйся к нам, вставай. Но я никак не могла это сделать, потому что я не понимала, за какие цели они стоят, и что конкретно мне нужно сделать, и за что бороться.
My friends were also at the Maidan Square. They often called me and texted me saying, Ira, come join us, Ira, stand up. But I could not force myself to do that because I did not understand what goals they were pursuing, what exactly I was supposed to stand up for.
Потому что каждый из тех друзей, которые ко мне обращались, они все имели разные мотивы.
Every one of those friends had their own motives.
Я как специалист внимательно изучала общественное мнение разных целевых групп.
And as a specialist, I was analyzing attentively all the sociological studies done with the different groups present at the Maidan.
И я видела, что у каждой конкретной группы свои какие-то узкие мотивы.
And I saw that every particular group has its own narrow agenda.
Это было и вступление в Евросоюз, там, против Януковича, против коррупции, за свободу Тимошенко, против разгона студентов, и потому что просто там весело.
For example, for the integration to the European Union, against Yanukovych, the current president at the time, against corruption, to free Tymoshenko, against crackdown on students, or just because it's fun.
В общем, было только одно. Это все было похоже на массовый психоз. И я как специалист могу утверждать, что этот психоз очень грамотно и профессионально управлялся.
The only common thing was that it looked like a mass psychosis, and as a specialist, I can see that this mass frenzy was a result of the systematic and accurate planning.
Но люди, которые были в это вовлечены, это не понимали. Это можно назвать как управление поведением масс.
But people who were involved in the movement did not realize it, so you can just call it something like mass control.
Мне, как человеку, который организовал в своей жизни многие мероприятия, было видно, что такое большое масштабное мероприятие невозможно организовать спонтанно, это не спонтанно.
To me, as a person who has organized a lot of events, it was obvious that such a large-scale event, such a large-scale demonstration could not emerge spontaneously. It was organized.
Я понимала, каких огромных денег это стоит. Это и организация сцены, организация оборудования, это палатки, еда, это организация, в конце концов, туалетов.
And I saw how much money would it cost. It involves organization of a podium, equipment, tents, food, installment of toilets.
Самое главное – это направление потоков, куда конкретную точку в конкретный момент идти людям.
And the most importantly, the guidance of a mass of people at any particular moment to a given location.
Я покажу вам короткое видео. Это отрывки из фильма французского режиссера Пола Морейры, который снял фильм о событиях на Майдане и событиях у нас в Одессе.
I will show you excerpts from the movie by Paul Moreira, who made it about the incident that happened in Odessa.
Sans eux, la révolution ukrainienne n'aurait jamais triomphé. Pour les caméras du monde entier, ils étaient des héros. Et une diplomate américaine est même venue leur offrir des petits pains. En février 2014, ces combattants de rue ont fait fuir le président. Et ils ont installé un nouveau gouvernement. Et certains d'entre eux ont pris des armes pour combattre les pro-russes à l'Est. Puis, ils sont devenus un danger, même pour le nouveau gouvernement. Leurs armées parallèles peuvent imposer leur ordre dans la rue. Sur Internet, ils diffusent leurs exploits. Et à Odessa, ils ont commis un massacre.
Результатом противостояния на Майдане стал государственный переворот и свержение существующей власти. Непосредственными исполнителями насилия стали вооруженные группировки, объединенные идеологией насилия и радикального национализма.
The Maidan protests resulted in the coup d'etat and the overthrow of the current government. The violence was carried out indirectly by armed groups who shared ideology of the Ukrainian radical nationalism.
Своими героями они объявили националистических деятелей времен Второй мировой войны – Бандеру, Шухевича, Коновальца и других деятелей, которые дискредитировали себя сотрудничеством с гитлеровским фашизмом.
As their heroes, they declared the leaders from the times of the Second World War, such as Bandera, Shukhevich, Konovalets, who discredited themselves because of their collaboration with the Nazi.
Мысль о том, что этих людей, которые выступали под черно-красными знаменами и не скрывали своих взглядов, фашистских взглядов, не знает цивилизованный Запад. Ведь много лет назад состоялся суд в Нюрнберге, и фашизм был осужден.
A thought that such groups that did not hide their ideological views and would come out under the red and black banners of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists that collaborated with the Nazi was just fantastic because, and especially because they received support from the civilized West. And as we all know, fascism was condemned many years ago at the Nuremberg trials.
Профашистские политические деятели не только пришли к власти, но и получили полную безоговорочную поддержку руководства США и Евросоюза.
Pro-fascist political figures and groups did not only come to power, but also received full and unconditioned support from the governments of the United States and European Union.
Все это привело к появлению в Украине противостояния. Движение «Анти-Майдан». Это было протестное движение против радикальных украинских националистов.
This all led to the emergence of the opposition in the country called Anti-Maidan, which would oppose the Maidan supporters, radical Ukrainian nationalists.
Таким образом, в стране появились два лагеря. Это Майдан и Анти-Майдан. И это особенно ярко проявилось в Одессе.
And thus began the coexistence of two camps, Maidan and Anti-Maidan, which was very manifest in Odessa especially.
Одесса – это очень мирный город, и эти два лагеря, они совершенно нормально взаимодействовали. Они делали мирные протесты и мирные марши по городу, выражая свою точку зрения, никогда не пересекая.
Odessa is a peaceful town, and these two camps have been organizing very peacefully, carrying out their marches in the city, but never crossing each other.
Это все происходило до 2 мая 2014 года, когда в Одессе должен был состояться футбольный матч. На этот матч прибыл целый поезд футбольных фанатов, и многотысячная толпа этих радикалов, которые управляли бандеровскими формированиями, устроила провокацию в центре города.
But the peaceful demonstrations only continued till May 2nd, 2014, when a soccer match was planned in the city, and the entire train of fans came to the city for the match, and the crowd. They formed a crowd of several thousands of militants led by the nationalist and pro-fascist leaders from the Maidan.
Они разгромили мирный палаточный городок Антимайдана, загнали большое количество людей в дом профсоюзов, который находился на этой площади, и подожгли его.
They destroyed the camp that was tent camp that was set up at the Kulikova field for anti-Maidan activists, and forced people from the tent camp into the house of the trade unions, and then set it on fire.
Я покажу, что произошло на коротком видео.
I will show what's happened in a short video.
Сразу же после 2 мая в Одессе началась борьба за правосудие.
Immediately after the May 2nd, in Odessa started the struggle for justice.
Родственники, друзья и просто неравнодушные одесситы требовали справедливого расследования этих событий.
Family of the victims, friends, just people from Odessa who were not indifferent, demanded a just investigation.
Они стали собираться на Куликовом поле, и происходит практически каждое воскресенье, и делают мемориалы в память о погибших.
They started gathering at the Kulikova field where the incident took place, and still doing that almost every Sunday and make memorials for the victims.
Однако на все эти мероприятия приходят радикальные националисты и стараются помешать проведению этих мероприятий.
But to all these events, the radical nationalists come and try to disrupt them.
После 2 мая было арестовано очень много людей, и все они были сторонниками антимайдана.
After the May 2nd, a lot of people were arrested, but all of them were opponents of the Maidan. Those who were among the victims. Yeah.
Opponents of Maidan, yeah. Каждый раз, когда никто из тех, кто убивал людей, не был ни арестован, ни осужден.
But none of those who actually was killing and was actually guilty in the incident was arrested.
Постоянно, когда происходит суд над сторонниками антимайдана, возле суда собираются радикальные левые.
And every time a trial takes place of those arrested opponents of the Maidan, the crowd of ultra radicals come in.
Вот вы видите на фотографии это здание суда, возле которого собираются вот такие бандиты военизированные.
Here you can see a building of a courthouse where the hooligans gather before a trial.
Они называют себя патриотами.
They call themselves patriots.
Они избивают журналистов, которые приходят туда что-то снимать.
They beat journalists who come there to video it.
Эти фотографии сделаны в здании суда непосредственно во время судебного производства.
These pictures are taken in the courthouse during a trial or investigation.
Они оказывают давление на судей.
They make pressure on judges.
Заставляют их принимать те решения, которые считают нужными.
They force them to take decisions which are favorable to them.
Они называют это патриотизмом и справедливостью.
And this is what they call patriotism and justice.
Вот это они побеждают.
This is their victory.
Именно поэтому мы боремся за то, чтобы справедливость восторжествовала.
And that's why we are fighting for justice.
Мы обращаемся ко всем неравнодушным людям во всем мире с просьбой о поддержке.
And we address all the people around the world who are not indifferent and ask for support.
Мы сделали петицию, в которой мы просим ООН о справедливом и независимом расследовании того, что произошло.
So we created a petition where we ask UN for a just and independent investigation into the accident.
Здесь адрес, по которому можно пойти и подписать эту петицию.
Here you can see a website where you can go and sign the petition electronically.
И здесь ее текст, вы можете с ним
And also a statement which you can read.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much for your attention.
There were Ukrainians who collaborated with the occupation, and there were Ukrainians who gave their lives resisting it. There was a man named Bandera, who is a famous Nazi collaborator, who also wanted to build an independent Ukraine and came into some conflict with the Nazis over that. He's seen as a strong nationalist figure, and he founded an organization called the Banderas, who I think, isn't that the red and black flag, the Bandera flag? Yeah. Who are an openly fascist organization, and they function today in Ukraine. So you have people who are the children or the grandchildren of people who were Nazi collaborators, and I don't mean a few here or there, but a large section just as you had in Poland and Hungary, and this is why it was difficult, one of the reasons why it was so difficult to build socialism in those countries. So it wasn't that there was a fascist movement imported from the West. There was an indigenous group that still carried on that admired the people who collaborated with the Nazis and kept their ideas alive. And then after the collapse of socialism, they were able to reemerge, as well as new groups. And they also are, if you looked at these pictures, I was noticing, because, we've been trying to raise money for T-shirts for our organization for years. And when you look at those uniforms, first of all, they're all clean. They're not hand-me-downs. They're new. And they got not just the camouflage, but they got a little thing here and a little thing there and a backpack, and they got a gun, and they got, you don't go to Joe's Sporting Goods the shop to pick that stuff up. Someone is funding them. And I went on the website, a Facebook page. I went on the Facebook page for the Maidan movement the other day, one of the groups. They had a shopping list. They had a shopping list of things they needed. It wasn't munitions, but it was all, munition type stuff. And it said, I wonder if one of our rich friends would be willing to fund these. They're all funded by oligarchs. They're funded by little Trumps who have a lot of money, who fund their own fascist group, like you'd fund a soccer team. And they equip them and they send them out and they do their bidding, and they're gradually getting more and more influence in the government. The new Speaker of the Parliament is a man who formed an organization about 15 years ago called the Social Nationalists. Does that ring a bell? It was called the Social Nationalists. It was an out-and-out neo-Nazi organization. They changed the name in 2012. Some people say under the advice of the CIA. But he's now the Speaker of Parliament. He's the second most powerful person in the country. The fascists don't control the government, but they're moving increasingly into positions, and you see how they intimidated the judges. In a political way, they do that to the elected government. And that is where they came from. Now, Bruce, you were going to...
I'd just like to add one thing. There's a really good article by Diana Johnstone, Paris, American journalist. It was published in Counterpunch, and she tells the whole story about the run-up to the coup d'etat and how it was basically the whole thing was set up in advance. So if you just go to just Google Diana Johnstone, Counterpunch, Ukraine, I'm sure that article will come up. It's a really excellent, excellent piece, the best I've seen about the whole run-up. And don't forget that Victoria Nuland was filmed, Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs, was filmed making a presentation in front of Exxon and Mobil signs that said... Chevron, thank you. That we spent $5 billion on this coup project. So clearly, again, USAID, CIA, National Endowment for Democracy, George Soros, they paid for the operation. And that video is online in YouTube as well.
And I was very proud to be part of that UNAC delegation to go to Odessa. It was a great honor to be there and to stand with the many, many people there in a very courageous act to remember those that were massacred on May 2nd, 2014. I had begun following Ukraine right around the time of the Maidan at the end of 2013, beginning of 2014, and really watched that whole massacre almost essentially in real time, because the videos were going up on the internet really as it was happening, and it was just a shocking experience to see it, and I've been really consumed by the issue ever since. The global network against weapons and nuclear power in space that I work for, that I coordinate, has been following the situation of U.S. And NATO expansion right up to the Russian border for many years now. I think most people know that at the time of the collapse of the Soviet Union, then Secretary of State Jim Baker promised Mikhail Gorbachev that the United States would not expand, or NATO would not expand 1 centimeter towards the Russian borders, And then when Jimmy Carter became president, he violated that promise. And ever since that time, NATO has been on steroids. Obama has been a key factor in all of that. And particularly, the global network is really concerned about missile defense deployments. In Romania, just a week ago, the U.S. opened a missile defense base in Romania and broke ground on one in Poland. And a missile defense radar has gone into Turkey. And these are key elements in U.S. first strike attack planning. The idea is that the U.S. could launch a first strike attack on Russia or China, and then when they tried to respond, these so-called missile defense systems that are now being used to surround both those countries, Russia and China, would then take out that retaliatory capability, giving the U.S. a quote-unquote successful first strike attack. And in fact, at the U.S. Space Command, they annually war game that now every year. They're practicing it. So in addition to Romania, Poland, the radar in Turkey, U.S. Aegis destroyers, Navy Aegis destroyers, are also outfitted with these interceptor missiles. These ships are built in my hometown of Bath, Maine, and they are now going into the Mediterranean and the Black Sea on a regular basis, expanding this whole missile defense operation around Russia. So Ukraine has been on our radar now for several years, and we're watching it very closely and seeing what's happening. And as I dig deeper and deeper into this issue, what I'm really learning is that the real goal, the real agenda for Ukraine is to destabilize it, create chaos there, like has happened in Iraq, like has happened in Libya, in order to create this kind of destabilization along the Russian border as part of the U.S. program for regime change in Moscow. That's the ultimate goal. That's the ultimate plan of the United States. And I think it's important to ask the question, why? Fundamentally, what's the reason? And I think there are several that are important. Number one, by now we should know that the role of the Pentagon in the world today is to serve as the primary resource extraction service for corporate capitalism. And in the case of Russia, they have the world's largest supply of natural gas. In addition, because of climate change and the melting of the Arctic ice, the oil corporations are anxious to drill, baby, drill in the Arctic. And who has the largest border with the Arctic Sea other than Russia? And so it's very clear that one of the goals then of the United States military and foreign policy today is to balkanize Russia, to break it up into pieces, into constituent parts that would make it easier for the oil corporations to get up and control the Arctic resource extraction program. And then finally, I think the development of BRICS, which stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, the alternative global economic system, is a challenge to the IMF, the World Bank, the Western bankers' program. And so they've got to go after the various BRICS countries, as we're now seeing in Brazil, we're seeing in Russia, we're seeing in China, whether it's USAID, whether it's National Endowment for Democracy, whether it's George Soros-funded NGOs. In all of these various countries, they're working overtime to help destabilize internally these countries. And that's why Russia and China now have essentially banned these kind of, in particular, Soros NGOs from these from their countries. In addition, the GMO corporations view the good soil, the good growing earth in Ukraine as a vital resource they want to get their hands on. And in fact, you might have heard that Joe Biden's son has been appointed to a board, an oil extraction company in Ukraine. He's been appointed to the board of that particular organization because they'd like to do fracking along the eastern part of Ukraine. So for all these reasons, Ukraine is a prize that the United States wants to grab. They're doing everything they can to destabilize Ukraine itself, to break it apart from Russia, and to really also help create a refugee situation that not only floods Russia with refugees, but also Europe. A lot of Ukrainian people are moving into Poland. looking for work as the Ukrainian economy has become destabilized. And I think the anticipation is that they would probably be going into other European countries as well. And one of the goals of the United States is to also, in order to control the European Union, is to destabilize Europe as well in the coming years. Through chaos, the United States really tries to maintain control. So for all these reasons, the Global Network is very concerned about this issue, and we've been, for the last 2 years, doing a lot of work trying to educate our membership around the world and also the greater peace movement as to what key role Ukraine plays in U.S. foreign policy. And I'm sad to say it's been slow, but I do see in the last 6 months or so that there is growing interest in Ukraine, and so I'm glad to be a part of UNAC's effort to help bring this issue to other people. Thank you very much.
I was invited to attend a conference, actually in Lugansk, anti-fascist conference, the fourth one they've had in the last couple of years. And that was sort of the center point for my trip, but it involved about 2 weeks traveling first from Russia to Donetsk, then to Lugansk, and seeing a wide range of the effects that the war launched by the Ukrainian regime against what was the eastern part of Ukraine and now have formed independent republics for the last 2 years, as well as, of course, behind that, the U.S. role, as Bruce laid out so well, because the funding, the training through third parties, most of the weaponry is all coming from Washington that's fueling this war. So just to give a little bit of backstory, around the same time that the massacre happened in Odessa 2 years ago, in April of 2014, the new Ukrainian government, backed by the United States, which had banned the use of the Russian language, was trying to impose all kinds of onerous conditions on people, mainly Russian-speaking, but also other minority nationalities in the eastern part of Ukraine, launched a war attack on the protest movements in the eastern part of the country, particularly in Donetsk and Lugansk, also in Kharkov, of course in Odessa, and other cities. And this was most intense along the Russian border, Donetsk and Lugansk, which are historic areas of high concentration of working class people, where there's still a lot of loyalty and interest in the Soviet period, a lot of pro-socialist sentiment among the people, a lot of commitment to anti-fascist traditions of the Soviet Union. And it was there that the rebellion was strongest and was able to sort of break free. And on May 11th of 2014, there were elections held, referendums actually, in Donetsk and Lugansk, where people overwhelmingly voted to declare their independence from Ukraine. And since then, these two republics, Donetsk and Lugansk, have existed. They get a lot of aid and support from Russia, which, as Bruce laid out, under the Russian government, whatever you think of it, understands that they're next if Ukraine and the People's Republics in the East fall, they're next. And so they've invested a lot in supporting the independent existence of these two republics, particularly in terms of humanitarian aid, because there's a complete economic blockade by Ukraine and the Western powers against them, which has resulted in, especially in 2014 into early 2015, in a lot of malnourishment, lack of basic healthcare and other resources, education. And that situation is starting to improve now. A lot of people who had fled, and close to 1 million, maybe more than that, had fled in the early stages of the war. A lot of people have come back now and are trying to reestablish, sort of basic life in the region. But there were two things, there's so many things that happened in the 2 weeks I was there that it's hard to focus on, giving a 10-minute talk about it. I mean, for example, I saw the relationship between the people and the new popular army in Donetsk as they were preparing for the celebration of Victory Day, and how, just to be there and see the interaction of the people with the army was to refute all the lies in the Western media about this being a Russian occupation or something like that. I also got to tour the suburbs of Donetsk, which are still fired on regularly by Ukrainian forces in violation of the Minsk ceasefire, and see just the huge swaths of destruction of completely civilian areas on the outskirts of the city. But there were two incidents in Lugansk that really stuck with me and brought the situation home to me in a new way. One was 2 weeks ago when I had the opportunity to go to the front line in Lugansk to a forward base of the Prizrak Brigade, Ghost Brigade, which was founded by Alexei Moskovoy, who died a year ago, but is still operating. That militia brigade in Lugansk has become like a center point of the most radical and communist and socialist forces that have come both from the Donbass region, from Russia, and internationally from Europe, Latin America, and other places. The base that I visited, for example, there were fighters there from India, Norway, Sweden, Italy, Spain, Poland, as well as from Russia and Donbass itself. We were on top of a hill, a few kilometers outside of the village of Kirovsk, and it was like a sharp dip, and on the hill on the other side was the opposing forces base, forward base, the Ukrainian forces. And I had the opportunity to look through magnified sights of an anti-tank weapon, and I could see at the base not only the Ukrainian flag flying, but also the right sector, the fascist black and red flag of the right sector flying. It really was like you really see what the stakes are when you can actually look with your own eyes and see how close this is. And actually, the Ukrainian forces, just several days before our visit, had attempted to advance and had bombed a bus station nearby. And so now the Prizrak militia forces were digging trenches in that area to prevent the Ukrainian tanks and armored vehicles from advancing, because they don't have a comparable amount of weapons to put off a Ukrainian attack if they decide to try to advance, but they can slow them down by their superior relationship with the population and knowledge of the geography of the area. So then, and I should say that the fighters are living in really difficult conditions. While we were there, it was like a beautiful sunny afternoon, and then suddenly it started raining. Then suddenly there was a hailstorm, like all within the space of a half hour. And people, the fighters, men and women, young people from all over the world, but primarily from the Donbass region, are living in like little dugout shelters in the hillside. One of them told me that, a few days before it had rained heavily and that everybody had to pile into a couple of top bunks because their living quarters were completely flooded. So this is not like easy, this is not radical tourism we're talking about. We're talking about people who are, making big sacrifices to protect the local population. The following day, I was in the city of Lugansk, the capital of the Republic, for Victory Day, May 9th, which is the day throughout the former Soviet Union that the defeat of German fascism by the Red Army is celebrated. And of course, there's been a big revival of it in recent years with the expansion of NATO in the eastern part of Europe, and especially since the events in Ukraine 2 years ago. But it was an extraordinary experience to be there on Victory Day in this city that just 2 years before had fascists and pro-imperialist forces literally at the gate of the city again for the second time in less than a century. And to see tens of thousands of people streaming down the main boulevard as we came out, a few of the international delegates had come to Lugansk to meet with the Communist Party of Lugansk. And we came out of their office, we were attending the march with their delegation, and just to see like a sea of people coming down the main street of the city that had been largely emptied a couple of years ago during the height of the attacks, and young and old, people carrying the signs, a lot of them with the photos of their ancestors who had fought in World War II, the Great Patriotic War, and to see. I've been to a lot of big demonstrations in the United States and Washington and different places, probably bigger than that one, but I never felt the kind of unity and solidarity and urgency of it that I felt there. It was really an extraordinary experience. And you could tell that, people were not taking it for granted this day. It's more now for them than just an important, historic, symbolic day of something that happened long in the past. It's a living, breathing struggle for them right now that most of them have lived through. While I was there, I was actually standing right next to Maxim Chelenko, who's the head of the Communist Party in Lugansk, and his daughter, who's 2 years old, and thinking about my kids back home. And it really struck me that, this child had just been born at the time that the tanks from Ukraine were attacking the city. There was, the government building that had been taken over by the protesters was bombed. People were being blown apart in the street. We saw a tank on the outskirts of the city where 4 anti-fascists had sacrificed themselves to keep this tank going, to hold off the Ukrainian forces, to give the resistance time to prepare in the city, to defend the city. And it really just brought to me how urgent it is that we make these stories, whether it's Odessa, whether it's Lugansk and Donetsk, whether it's I've been told by people who know, thousands of political prisoners being held inside Ukraine now, a lot of them for nothing more than posting anti-government opinions on Facebook or other social media. We need to bring that issue to the movement here, link it to the struggles for Black Lives Matter, link it to the other anti-war struggles, to the anti-fascist campaign in Latin America, and make this a really vital part of our movement here in the United States, because it's our government that's funding the attacks, that's funding the growth of fascism in Ukraine and other parts of Eastern Europe. And And there's a big war coming, as Bruce described it, that we can play a vital role in preventing or not. It's up to us. The problem is that there's no solution, there's no resolution in sight. But they, in Donetsk and Lugansk, especially in Donetsk, they feel like they are in a position to defend their sovereignty indefinitely, at least for the time being, as long as they have, Russia's support at their back. A great deal of weaponry from the Ukrainian side was captured last winter of 2015, the Debaltsevo Cauldron, it was called, where they encircled militia forces from both Donetsk and Lugansk succeeded in encircling Ukrainian forces that were occupying these cities in northern Donetsk. And most of the soldiers on the Ukrainian side, most of them are draftees. The only real motivated forces on the Ukrainian side are the fascist militias. But the bulk of the Ukrainian army are draftees who don't want to be there. And the vast majority of those people surrendered and were repatriated back to Ukraine. But the weapons and the vehicles and stuff were kept. And in addition to that, it's a metal working area. It's a mining area, and so they've been able in the last year to really get the armament ammunition factories back up and running, and in Donetsk, and they have they say ample ammunition to put off another Ukrainian attack. I toured the suburbs of Donetsk where there still is sporadic fighting with the head of the Donetsk International News Agency. And the way he explained it was that, it's a situation where Ukraine could try another offensive, especially if they're feeling pressure from the neo-Nazi forces, if they're feeling, like the regime that currently is in Kiev could be replaced at the whim of the fascists, or pressure from the United States. And we should say, Joe Biden's son was mentioned earlier as someone who's involved in the economic machinations there. But Biden himself really is like the colonial governor of Ukraine, and goes over there on the regular and gives marching orders. And people here who think Biden is this funny guy who's a liberal, he's like the conscience of the Obama administration, don't know crap about what's going on over there. But that said, they feel confident that they could stop whatever Ukraine throws at them at this point. The only way militarily to resolve the question in favor of Ukraine, according to the folks I spoke to, is if NATO conducts an air war of the kind they conducted in Yugoslavia or Libya. And that would bring, NATO air power right to the border of Russia. And that has untold consequences on both sides. So that's really sort of where everything is at right now. And the problem for people living in Donetsk and Lugansk is that, Ukraine regularly violates the ceasefire. People continue to die, not in the hundreds as they did a couple of years ago, but in the ones and twos and sometimes in the tens on a weekly basis, a monthly basis. Along the frontier, there are still a number of people, especially seniors who don't have the capacity to leave, who are living in basements and things, and have been for the last 2 years because their areas are routinely subjected to shelling. And it's a situation that can't get better unless there's a powerful anti-war movement in the West to force the U.S. to pull back, to force NATO to pull back, and combined with a movement against the regime in Ukraine. That's really what it's going to take ultimately, is a people's movement inside Ukraine against the regime, against the fascists. But they can't do it alone. They need the support of the progressive movement in the West, and particularly here in the United States, to help alleviate the pressure of the imperialist powers.
Could I just add that